Sarah meant to pick him up or something. Give us a shout with him. Rach, this is Joe. I tried your number now, I don't know how many times. You're not Jackie's, you're not your mother's. I'm now really, really, really worried about you. Please call me, please call. It isn't funny. This is like you, like you. Rach, it's me again. Please ring. I've been crying. You have me worried. I don't know. Please talk to me, please.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at another twisted case with you. A well-respected woman in their close-knit community, 30-year-old mom of two Rachel O'Reilly, was mysteriously found dead in her house in 2004 after failing to pick up her son from school. Our love and respect goes out to all those who knew and loved Rachel O'Reilly, and all those affected by this case. Rachel O'Reilly was born on October 10, 1973, to a young Teresa Lowe, just 17 at the time. Teresa, feeling too young to raise a child, made the heart-wrenching decision to give Rachel up for adoption. Rachel was taken in by Rachel Callaly, who welcomed her into a warm and cozy home that eventually included 5 adopted siblings. The Callaly family was incredibly close-knit, and they always made time for each other. Rachel had 3 brothers, Anthony, Declan, and Paul, and a sister named Anne. She was an athletic girl, full of energy, and was also known for her love of softball. Described as a live wire with a kind heart, Rachel was a bright ray of sunshine in her family. Rose fondly remembered her as an adventurous child who threw herself into everything she could, while her father, Jim, praised her independence and love for decorating. At 17, Rachel met Joe O'Reilly at the department store where they both worked. Joe was 2 years older and was surprised by Rachel's height. She stood at 5'11", just a few inches shorter than his 6'5" frame. Despite Joe's repeated attempts to ask her out, Rachel initially turned him down, but Joe kept trying and trying. Joe, eager to win Rachel over, found out she played softball and one day turned up at her practice session and joined her team. Both of them excelled and even had the potential to turn professional. Their bond soon grew into a romantic relationship. At the top of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, Joe proposed to Rachel, and a couple of years later, they got married. They welcomed 2 sons and moved to their new home, a bungalow called View in Knoll in 2003. It was the perfect place to raise their children, and Rachel loved being a mother and dedicated everything she did to her boys. Joe O'Reilly also came from a close family as the second eldest of 2 boys and 2 girls. But his childhood was different. His parents' marriage fell apart when he was young, and his father moved to England. Despite this, Joe was incredibly confident and determined to succeed in the advertising industry. Although he did not have the formal qualifications, his persuasive nature and confidence with clients made up for it. He was known for getting to work early and leaving late, all for success. When Rachel and Joe moved into their 3-bedroom bungalow, Rachel's stepmother Rose had some concerns. She worried that Rachel might feel lonely, as Joe's work kept him away from home so often. Despite this, Rachel seemed happy with the move. She quickly became well known in the area, selling Avon and Tupperware. On Monday, October 4, 2004, around 5:30 a.m., Joe O'Reilly left the family home to go to work at Viacom Outdoor Advertising in the Bluebell Industrial Estate, where he was an account manager. Later that morning, Joe sent Rachel a message saying, "You and the boys sleep okay? Wish Jackie a happy birthday for me, please. Kiss, kiss." But he received no reply. Between 11:52 a.m. and 1:45 p.m., Joe left Rachel several voicemails. At 1:15 p.m., Joe got a call from their son's daycare, which told him that Rachel did not pick up their son at 12:30 as usual. Concerned, Joe called Rachel's phone and left a message, asking if someone else was supposed to pick up their son. He called again at 1:24, telling her he was worried and asking her to call him back, but still received no response.
He began ringing Rachel and she didn't answer the phone. He rang her mother.
And he said he was just wondering, had we heard from Rachel that he hadn't? I said, God, that's very odd, I said, because if there was any problem at all, she definitely would have rang me. And I said, I'll go out now.
Joe set off to get their sons and called his mother-in-law, Rose, explaining that he hadn't heard from Rachel all morning and that both the home phone and her mobile were unanswered. He asked Rose to go to their home to check on Rachel. As he drove down the motorway, Joe called Rachel's phone again, telling her he had spoken to Rose, who also hadn't heard from her, and begged her to call him back. Joe then phoned Rachel's youngest brother, Anthony, to tell him that he hadn't heard from Rachel and that she had missed picking up their son from daycare. Family members tried calling Rachel's home phone and mobile, but all the calls went unanswered. Rose had a feeling that something was seriously wrong. This was not like Rachel, so she set off to check on her daughter. When she pulled up at the bungalow, she felt a brief sense of relief upon seeing Rachel's car in the driveway and the patio door open. But the house was eerily silent. The kitchen drawers were open and items were scattered across the floor. In the living room, videos were dumped in a pile, making it look like the house had been robbed.
The door was wide open, it was just right back. And I walked into the kitchen and the drawers of the unit had been emptied out onto the floor, and I started to get a bit uneasy.
When Rose reached Rachel and Joe's bedroom, she found her daughter's lifeless body. Rachel was lying on her back in a pool of blood, the upper half of her body twisted. There was so much blood that Rose couldn't tell if Rachel's face was on its side or face down. Blood covered the walls and ceiling, and there was even blood spatter in the bathroom. When Rose touched her, she felt Rachel was as cold as marble. A neighbor later recalled hearing Rose's screams. Rose ran to her bag to get her phone and called the Gardaí, the Irish police. She then called one of her sons, Declan, to tell him the news. Declan said he was coming home, and so was Jim, Rose's husband. Joe arrived at the house at 2:30 with the children and was informed about what happened. Joe ran into the house shouting Rachel's name. Rachel's best friend Jackie, who was a nurse, also came to the house. She checked Rachel and confirmed there was no pulse and she wasn't breathing. Rachel's father, Jim, soon arrived, but was told by a Garda not to go inside due to the horrifying scene. When the first Garda arrived, Joe approached them in the garden. He explained that he had been in the house and touched Rachel's body to check for a pulse. Anne mentioned that Joe had moved a box near where Rachel's body lay into the boys' room and was worried that he might have destroyed evidence. Joe told the Gardaí he had an alibi. He had been at a bus depot in Broadstone. It seemed unlikely he could have traveled all the way to the house and back in the given time frame. Rachel's father, Jim, said that Rachel would have fought for her life with everything she had. He believed the killer attacked her from behind. Although it didn't initially appear to be a robbery gone wrong, one thing stood out immediately. There was money in the home that hadn't been taken. 800 euros in a box in the kitchen and 400 euros in Rachel's bag. The police didn't believe this was a random attack carried out by a stranger. The brutality of the assault indicated a deep hatred. Whoever did it, they planned all of it way before.
I made my way outside. The superintendent said to me, "What did you see in there?" I said, "I saw two things." And he said, "What?" I said, "Firstly, it wasn't a burglary." "Correct," he said. And he says, "What's the second thing?" Well, I said, "Whoever done this to this lady hated her." I said, "There's a hate and a viciousness in what I seen down there." He says, "Correct."
An incident room was set up at the station, and over 40 officers were dispatched to do door-to-door questioning and search the local area for potential clues. Based on the crime scene, the Gardaí believed Rachel had been caught totally off guard by the attack. Searches for the murder weapon were conducted, but nothing was found. Instead, the searchers discovered something more interesting. Half a mile away from the house, a plastic bag was found containing jewelry and a camera, two items Joe had said were missing. At that point, it was looking less and less like a burglary. That evening, Joe was questioned. He said he left for work as usual and headed to the gym beforehand. CCTV footage showed him leaving work at 8 a.m., walking towards a bus depot in Broadstone where his colleague was supposed to meet him. Part of Joe's job was checking advertisements on buses, which meant he had to travel around quite often. At 8:45 a.m., Derek set off and called Joe upon arriving at the depot, asking where he was. Joe replied he was in another part of the depot. Derek confirmed he had spoken to Joe on the phone when he arrived, and Joe had said he was there, just in a different part of the site. At the time Derek had that call, he didn't know Rachel had been murdered.
Gardaí carrying out a preliminary investigation outside the house where the remains of a mother of two were found this afternoon. State pathologist Dr. Mary Cassidy was called to the scene after the discovery.
During the questioning, the police asked Joe if anyone was known to dislike Rachel or if she had been seeing someone else romantically. In response, Joe said none of them were having an affair. But the Gardaí hadn't asked if Joe was having an affair, so why did Joe feel the need to clarify that he wasn't? This odd statement raised suspicions, and soon the truth came out. Joe himself was having an affair. He eventually admitted he had a brief fling with a woman named Nikki, insisting it wasn't serious. He mentioned that he had told Rachel 3 times that he wasn't having an affair. The couple had argued the day before she was killed, and Joe had slept in the spare room. The day after Rachel was found, Nikki was questioned by the police and confirmed the relationship, but also claimed it wasn't serious. That same day, the Gardaí received Rachel's post-mortem results. It revealed she had been bludgeoned with a heavy object, such as a dumbbell, which was one of the items Joe had reported missing from their home. Rachel's skull was broken in 2 places, and her face, shoulders, and neck had multiple lacerations. Defensive wounds on her arms indicated she had attempted to fight off her attacker. She had been hit between 6 and 9 times, and blood in her airways suggested she had struggled to breathe.
There's nothing specific enough about the injuries to identify an actual weapon. All I could say was it was something fairly heavy to cause the damage to the skull. Certainly something like a dumbbell, anything that is heavy enough and wielded with enough force. The force that they have to use to produce those injuries is pretty enormous.
A couple of days after the murder, the police searched Joe's office and seized his laptop. This deepened the investigation, as every clue pointed away from a random burglary and towards a more personal, violent attack. A series of deleted emails were recovered by the police, revealing Joe's deep hatred for Rachel. In conversations with his sister Anne, Joe used vulgar language and curse words to refer to Rachel, even saying she repulsed him. When these emails came to light, Rachel's family was devastated. At family gatherings, Joe would tend to separate himself from the adults, and nobody really knew much about him. But this was the last thing they expected. The house was then cordoned off for 9 days. While the investigation continued, the family prepared for Rachel's burial. They decided to write letters to be placed in the coffin with her. Following the burial, Rachel's parents received the cards attached to the flowers, and one card stood out. Joe's card simply said, "See you later." Joe's behavior continued to raise eyebrows. The police told him he could now return to the house and make a note of anything he thought had been stolen. He repeated that some of Rachel's jewelry, a camera, and 2 towels were missing, along with one of the dumbbells. But the jewelry and camera had already been found. Despite the house still being in disarray with Rachel's blood everywhere, Joe invited Rose and Jim over, saying there was a sense of peace and that it would be good for them to visit. Rose was hesitant, but Jim thought that if it helped Joe process what had happened, maybe it could help them too. To their shock, when they arrived, the house remained a crime scene with visible bloodstains and overall chaos. Joe's insistence on bringing them back to such a setting, where their daughter had been brutally murdered, only made them feel more and more suspicious. Joe began reenacting the murder and speculating on how Rachel had been killed, even pointing to the blood spatter on the ceiling. He showed them the blood on the walls, adding that he thought the killer had stepped over her body and then cleaned up in the bathroom while listening to Rachel choke on her own blood, and that the killer had gone back into the room to finish her off. When they went back downstairs, Joe insisted that they listen to the voicemails he had left for her that day. Rose later said she could hear Rachel's voice in her head saying, "He did it." That night, Rose spoke to Jim about her feelings. Jim was distraught and asked her not to talk to anyone else, saying people reacted to grief in different ways and that Joe was just behaving as if he were in shock. Rose couldn't speak to Jim about it again because he would get so upset. Joe also started speaking to the media, claiming the family was worried that the killer could attack again. He even went on television to ask for information and address directly to the killer.
I would appeal to anybody that knows anything at all that they might even think unimportant, if they could rack their brains.
What we can gather was that has been taken so far doesn't just, not that anything can justify that what happened, but it just doesn't justify the violence and the excess of what happened. It just doesn't fit. Why kill her? You know, we feel because she could identify that person. So it's quite possible that this is someone she knew, this is someone we knew. Somebody somewhere has to have seen something.
A journalist interviewed Joe at the house, and before long, he asked her if she wanted to see the bedroom where Rachel had been murdered. This took her by surprise, and when he pointed out where the blood had been and where she was found, it left her deeply nervous.
He suddenly asked us if we would like to see where it happened. Now, I was still at the beginning of my career. I wasn't sure, what he was offering or asking us. I kind of, I suppose I stalled a little and kind of said, bring us down to the bedroom? And he went, yeah, I can bring you down to the bedroom, show you where it happened.
Another journalist visited the house 12 days after the murder and took photographs, including one of Joe sitting in his kitchen. Joe mentioned that the Gardaí were treating him as a suspect. When the journalist asked if he believed he was a suspect, Joe said yes.
The situation you both found in the house, did you get the sense that she'd been taken unawares, that this was someone that perhaps she trusted?
Yeah, I think so. Where the murder happened was in the bedroom, which is the very last room of the house. So it's the room where you're least likely to bring someone you don't know because you're cornered. My view as well would be, and again, it's just my view, it's not a police theory, it's just my own personal belief, is that she knew the person, because why else would you kill her? If it's a violent robbery, why go to the extreme of murdering the person unless they can identify you? And that's why we've talked about this and practically nothing else for the last 3 weeks. We just feel it's someone she would have known or someone she could have identified.
People from the community and the couple's friendship circles called Joe to offer their condolences and asked if there was anything they could do to help. Joe would offer to show them the crime scene and explain what he thought had happened, something later referred to as the murder tours. In another interview, Joe claimed he had to meet a client that evening, but this turned out to be a lie. He instead went and visited his lover, Nikki. He was on TV asking for information about the murder of his wife, and he spent the night with the woman he had been having an affair with. When news of the affair broke in the media, interest in the case only increased. One journalist noted that, looking back over her interview notes, Joe hadn't actually mentioned loving his wife or how much he misses her. He spoke about how devastated the children were, but said nothing about his own feelings. Despite Joe and Nikki's efforts to downplay their relationship, it was becoming clear that this had been a long-term affair lasting several months. They had met while working at an advertising agency, and after a night out at a pub, they swapped email addresses and mobile phone numbers to keep in contact. Joe would tell Rachel he was away for work when he was actually going to see Nikki. They spoke on the phone every day and would meet each other 2 times a week, all while Joe firmly denied everything. In December 2005, 14 months after Rachel's murder, the Gardaí were still working to build their case against Joe O'Reilly. At that point, everyone knew it was Joe. They just needed to find the right evidence to pin him. One crucial piece of evidence was the analysis of Joe's phone location data, which showed that his phone was pinging off a mast near his home around the time of the murder. Rachel's exhumation on March 8, 2005, also revealed something very suspicious. Joe O'Reilly had placed a letter into Rachel's coffin during her burial, which led her family to ask the police to examine it as they suspected that Joe might have written something incriminating. The note simply said, "I am sorry." But this note was considered ambiguous and not sufficient on its own. The exhumation of Rachel's body also revealed a 5-page letter Joe had written, which was chemically treated and examined using infrared technology. In one passage, Joe expressed deep love and regret, saying, "Rachel, I love you so very, very much. I cannot think what I will ever do without you, and I don't want to think. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and you will never be replaced. This is the hardest letter I've ever had to write for reasons only we know. Rachel, please forgive me. 2 words, 1 sentence, but I will say them forever." As the Gardaí were searching through CCTV footage, they came across a car. The car was similar to Joe's blue Fiat Punto, but the license plate was not clear enough for identification. To establish that it was indeed Joe's car on the footage, Gardaí conducted a search of all Fiat Punto drivers in Ireland, which resulted in 2,500 matches. While they couldn't eliminate every driver, they ruled out enough to strongly suggest the car belonged to Joe. The police also contacted O2 for call records, hoping to corroborate Joe's movements on the day of Rachel's murder. Although they couldn't provide specific call recordings, an engineer from France helped trace Joe's phone activity. They pinpointed which cell towers Joe's phone had accessed throughout the day, which allowed them to map his entire route. It was revealed that at 5:45 a.m. on the morning of the murder, Joe left home to go to a gym on the city outskirts where he was supposed to meet his colleague. On his way to a petrol station, he filled up his car and received a 28-minute call from Nikki, which was the first of 8 calls they exchanged that day. Despite Joe's claim that he was at Broadstone all morning, his phone's data showed it had pinged off a mast near Murphy's Quarry, which was less than a mile away from his home. Joe had also sent an email to his colleague saying his phone would be out of service for most of the morning, which contradicted his earlier statements. On the morning of the murder, CCTV footage caught Rachel leaving with their 2 sons around 9 a.m. to drop them off at daycare and school. 3 minutes later, she passed by Murphy's Quarry in her car. She returned home at 9:41 a.m., and shortly thereafter, it's believed she was killed. The car believed to be Joe's was also seen on CCTV passing Murphy's Quarry around the times relevant to Rachel's movements. Tons of evidence pointing towards Joe O'Reilly's involvement in Rachel's murder finally led to his arrest in October 2006.
Joe O'Reilly arriving at Swords District Court earlier today. The 35-year-old had been arrested this morning at a house in Dunleer, County Louth, and brought to Balbriggan Garda Station. Detective Sergeant Pat Marry told the court that at 10:55 a.m. he formally charged Mr. O'Reilly with the murder of his wife, Rachel O'Reilly, on October 4th, 2004 at the Knoll in County Dublin.
Gardaí recalled Joe reacting with shock when informed of his arrest at his mother's house. He was formally charged with Rachel's murder that day and entered a plea of not guilty. The trial began on June 25, 2007, drawing a huge amount of media and public interest across Ireland. And on July 21, 2007, after 9.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict of guilty. Despite overwhelming evidence, including forensic analysis and witness testimonies, he has never admitted to the crime. The emotional scenes outside the court were described as some of the most extraordinary ever witnessed there. The courtroom erupted with cheers and applause upon the verdict. Joe O'Reilly was sentenced to life imprisonment for Rachel's murder, which marked the beginning of his incarceration at Mountjoy Prison. Rachel's family, who had gone through a long and painful journey seeking justice for their daughter, expressed heartfelt thanks to the Gardaí, the prosecution team, and the people of Ireland who supported them with cards, letters, and prayers throughout the ordeal. For them, the verdict brought a sense of closure and justice for Rachel. Joe O'Reilly has been denied parole on multiple occasions, and Rachel's family is making sure that he serves his life sentence. Currently incarcerated at Midlands Prison in Port since 2002, after spending the first 15 years of his sentence at Dublin's Wheatfield Prison, O'Reilly has continuously sought to appeal his conviction without success. His attempts to overturn the verdict have been consistently denied by the courts. Do you think that justice was served? Why do you think Joe denies it all to this day? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please consider dropping a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Take care and see you in the next one.